Hey, everybody. Welcome to Tabletop Voices. I am James Introcaso, and I am here today with one of my favorite people. This is a new show where we are going to talk to all kinds of great people in the tabletop RPG industry. And today I have with me the one and only Teos Abadia, who you may know as Alpha Stream on Twitter. Teos, say hello and let the people know who you are and what you do in tabletop role-playing games.
Thanks, James. I am Teos, AlphaStream on Twitter, alphastream.org on my blog, and I have had the fortune of working on a number of things over the years. Kind of the things I tend to do are organized play adventures, and that started back in 3rd edition and has moved on, primarily focused on Dungeons & Dragons. Interactive experiences like Vault of Dracolich or Confrontation at Candlekeep are some of my favorites. I helped redesign the D&D Open, which you have taken over. I got to write Cloud Giants Bargain, which was an Acquisitions Incorporated adventure, one of my favorite projects. And recently I wrote the adventures to support the Dwarven Forge Kickstarter, which was super fun. And I continue to do work for them. And then I'm working on something I can't talk about.
Excellent. That's always a good sign when you're working on something you can't talk about. So before we jump into everything that you have done so far, take me back even further. When did you start playing tabletop RPGs? What were you playing? Where were you living? Give me all the details.
Yeah. Cool. So I was in Colombia, South America. I'm half Colombian. I consider myself Latino. And when I was growing up there, I took a summer camp to the U.S. and maybe like in 1982. And, you know, I saw people at this camp, like their board games and things, and people were playing D&D. And I remember there were paper chits for dice. It was one of those. And so I was like, that looks kind of interesting. And I came home and my mom said, well, actually, there's a group at school that's playing D&D of older kids. You should totally join them. So I listened to my mother. And then I just began like playing. He was a really good dungeon master, really inspired me. We played through all these classic AD&D and basic adventures. And then I just kept going from there. Then I found organized play, took off.
That's awesome. That's really, really cool that you started playing somewhere other than America, right? Like, I think a lot of times we get that same story with more American flavor, as it were. When you started playing, were you playing in Spanish with people?
Both languages, and I kind of had two groups. My school group, it was in a national school, and so the kids were from all over the place. Some Latin American countries, but also Europe. And then I had a group that and calling it D&D is a little bit of a forced term because we use the D&D rules, but also like action figures and, Lego Star Wars dolls. It didn't matter. And that was always in Spanish.
Mm-hmm. So at what point then did you make the shift from player to professional? When did you start getting paid?
It took a long time. There were a lot of years of being a really bad DM and filling notebooks with really bad ideas. But it began with really volunteering in 3rd edition for the organized play campaigns and kind of seeing what resonated with people, plus reading tons of adventures and seeing, when I ran this adventure 5 times at a con, why does someone like it or not like it? And so I began to write on that, and eventually I was being paid by Wizards of the Coast because they began paying for organized play. And what really took off was when I was an admin for the Ashes of Athos campaign, which is an unpaid thing. The Dungeons & Dragons staff came to the Winter Fantasy Convention, and they played an adventure I'd written, and they really liked it. There were Chris Perkins and Greg Bilsland and some others. And so afterwards, I received an invitation to write to them, which I actually had to turn down. That was very hard to do, but I was really busy with work at that time and with the Ashes of Athos. But it then led to writing for Dragon and Dungeon Magazine, and then to future projects after that.
What was that adventure that they played at Winter Fantasy?
So it was one of the Ashes of Athos adventures, and I think they particularly liked that I started it in media res, where you were on the back of this kind of like wagon or cart that's being pulled by these dark sun beasts of burden, and in front of you is another cart with a bad guy that you're chasing, and the bad guy sort of casts a lightning bolt at a column of rock and it's falling towards you. And so the first question is, okay, who's piloting this wagon or this chariot? And what do you do? And I just went straight into the action, and they went through a series of scenes that were, I think, pretty evocative, and folks liked them. Chris Sims was there, and he liked it a lot too. So I think that all helped.
Yeah, that sounds really awesome. You know, you've written for organized play and you're a champion of organized play. Why do you think that organized play is so important? You know, what does it mean to you and what does it mean to other people?
I think it fills a niche for bringing D&D to people who often can't get it otherwise. I got into it when I was traveling heavily and I couldn't reliably be in a home campaign. But there are a lot of people who really kind of need to find a stable group. If you've looked around and tried to find a good group online, it's tough. And so coming to a place that you know, it's not going to have a mountain of house rules. It's got stable rules, and it really uses D&D as D&D is written. And there are some really talented people writing all of that content. That really brings the quality level up and provides a great experience. And then you can come together as a community at conventions or online. And I think all of that really creates for a nice offering for people.
How do you think it's changed? You know, you started with third edition, like third to fourth and fourth to fifth. Since you've sort of written and played with content across all three of those editions, how has organized play changed and the content for it changed?
So one of the biggest changes is the amount of support that Wizards gives organized play is really high right now. It's some of the best it's ever been. There have been years when D&D was, despite the fact that they began organized play really through the RPGA program, there have been years when a lot of staff, and pretty important staff, wanted to kill it and didn't believe in it and saw it as sort of the domain of optimizers and sort of playing D&D the wrong way. They didn't like the early competitive aspects of it that have gone away. And so there really were some years that just saw very little support. And so what we're seeing right now is really very good.
Do you think that a lot of that has to do with the fact that some of the 5th edition staff got their start doing things in organized play?
Yeah, sure. I mean, Mike Merle's starting with Living Greyhawk and programs like that. Chris Lindsay being a force there. Before him, Chris Tulloch. There have been some real champions there, and I think they understand it. But also, Wizards was, for a while during the end of 3rd edition and 4th edition, really not participating in the convention scene much, and weren't even really connecting with fans that directly. And through being on those sites, through all these different live play opportunities, through all of these game days that they do, they have come to really tie into fans and to see firsthand for themselves why organized play is important and why it benefits D&D as a whole.
So let's break down your organized play products a little bit. I also want to touch on Cloud Giant's Bargain so we can sort of put a pin in that and hold it off to the side for a second. Of your organized play products, what are you most proud of?
That's a tough one. Working on the D&D Open was a great honor because we had to reimagine what the experience could be like and try to modernize it and increase its appeal. So that's something I'm very proud of what we did there. The adventure that I did for the Ravenloft season of organized play of the Adventures League is called The Artifact, and that works a bit like the board game Clue. And I think that creates a very nice sense of exploration and sort of mystery discovery. It's a bit of a murder mystery, you know, who did it with which weapon, why, where. And so unraveling that and going through it, I think is very fun for players. And a lot of people give me good feedback on that. In general, when I'm writing, I try to create new experiences. I try to think like, well, you know, I'm a fairly experienced author now, so I can take these chances, right? I can go in and maybe make a big mistake, but propel maybe the hobby forward a little bit, so that there's something new and different that can excite someone else, and maybe some future author thinks, I want to do it like this, but better, right? And that's a lot of my purpose there. And so I think with those projects, I've been able to do that.
How do you go about creating something different and new when you sit down to make a project and you think like, I want to do something different that's going to propel the hobby forward? What's your process?
So often it just begins with the premise, and through organized play, you're often given about a paragraph description of what you should write, maybe two. And so I'll try to think about it and say, you know, what's going to create a really neat experience? And so with the artifact, it was going down into an area that held the artifact, and they actually used the Amber Temple from the Ravenloft hardback. And so I tried to think, how can I reimagine this to create an experience? And then it seemed right that because the artifact has to do with unrequited love, that there would be some manipulation there that could create an interesting murder mystery type appeal. And then I started thinking about the board game Clue. And if you even look at the map looks like the board game surface. So I just, you know, start retooling it, but it's driven by the experience of what kind of feel I want to have.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that totally makes sense that, you know, you want to drive with what are you getting at first and then the design towards that goal, right? Which sort of brings me to Cloud Giant's Bargain. Could you set up Cloud Giant's Bargain for people who don't know what it is?
Sure. So it's a bit of a strange adventure. It's only available in its published form. It was printed as a booklet adventure. But it wasn't sold in stores. It was given out at a Fathom event where movie theaters broadcast the Acquisitions Incorporated live stream to movie theaters. Kind of a crazy experiment. And anyone who went there received this. And that's what the adventure was. Though I didn't know that until kind of halfway through the design process.
Wow. So when you were designing that adventure, then what was the goal for that adventure? What were you going for? What did you want to do with it?
So I was given a description of what the Chris Perkins game was going to be like, sort of 3 paragraphs worth of they're going to this Cloud Giant's castle, they're going to fight him. It has to do with the Storm King's Thunder series. And then I had to think, how do I tie into that? And my original plans were based on thinking that it was going to be live at the convention. And then when I realized it wasn't, but that it still had to deal with Cloud Giants, I thought, okay, this has to be a separate castle. So we're going to go with the sun. He's got a son now, and we're going to go to so you'll parallel their experience. And maybe it's a slightly different hook, like they received a peace offering from the sun. Is it real? So we're going to go find out if it is. And we'll go to a cloud castle, which is an awesome, fantastic place. And because this adventure is going to be given out to people who may not be D&D players or DMs, they may just be fans of watching it live, and this may be their first opportunity to decide to run D&D, play D&D. I'm going to put in a ton of boxes, kind of call-out boxes that provide DM guidance. And I think that's one of the things that ended up making it a really fun adventure. And then I just tried to fill it with really neat opportunities, right? Like fun scenes where you're going to be creative. Like the kitchens are filled with goblins, and they're not particularly going to fight you, but they are going to involve you in a funny situation while you're there, which will kind of cause you to be creative and interact with them in a fun way. Or you go into a sauna, and the old grandfather Cloud Giant is there, and he's blind, plus there's all the mist. So he's not really sure who you are, which gives you lots of latitude in how you want to approach that encounter.
Do you think you have a signature style for your adventures? Do you think you write a particular kind of adventure very well? What do you think?
Yeah, it's wordy and complicated.
I
I
would say a
apologize to
lot
all
of
the
people
readers.
would. A lot of people shy away from wordy and complicated. Why do you embrace wordy and complicated?
So I think what happens is that I'll do like an initial pass of a scene, and I'll go, you know what else could be here? Would also be great. My home group, they know this. When we play test the official D&D adventures, they'll like to say things like, if you wrote this, you would also have the house on fire, and there would be an NPC to save, and there'd be like a cool artifact you want. And I go, yeah, probably true.
Do you think the complication drives like players making hard choices like that?
Yeah, that's really what I'm trying to go for. So, why have a fight with Yuan Ti in a cool temple when you can also, at the far end of the room, have the treasure and a stone door that's slowly closing everything off? Now we're talking. Right now there's this extra piece. And hey, if we throw in some Indiana Jones style snakes coming through the walls, that's fun too.
That's excellent. Do you have a particular creature that you really like to use? I know that the Flumph you are a champion of the Flumph.
Yeah, so the Flump is really my attempt to kind of use it a bit as a proxy for being cool with everybody, no matter what they're like, and also just enjoying funny things. But I love using the Hears. I love using the Remoras. Those are two of my favorite ones, and they've been in a couple of my adventures.
I heard a Flumph rumor surrounding you, Teos, which is that you are responsible, at least partially, for the fact that the Flumph is in the Monster Manual in 5th edition D&D. Is that true?
I have had a couple of staff members say that, so it might be. I was at Gen Con one year, and I ran into Jeremy Crawford, who does the rules and is a major editorial force when it comes to deciding whether things are in or out. And as he was writing 5th edition, we met up, and he just came up to me and said, "Why are you so for the Flumph?" Or something to that effect. And so I thought, okay, this is my chance to pitch it. And so I did. I did my best to pitch the Flumph to him, and maybe that did it. I don't know. Thanks, Jeremy.
It's a pretty cool thing that Jeremy knew you were for the Flumph, right? Like, to have someone come up to you and say that shows that they're like reading your Twitter feed and paying attention to what you're saying.
I mean, as you know, I've been really blessed in a lot of ways, and having anybody that works on this game that I love so much at all care about what I do is just fantastic. It means a lot to me.
It's pretty awesome. So before I continue with questions, I just want to let people in the chat know that we are going to have a couple minutes to take questions from all of you in the chat. So if you have any questions for Teos, go ahead and fire them off, and we'll be keeping track of them in our Google Doc. And thank you very much, because I think Will is helping us wrangle those. So hats off to Will. So Teos,
James.
Oh,
I can say that I did. One of the questions in the chat, I can say I did not invent the Flumph. It comes from the Fiend Folio of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, and it's the only lawful good creature in that book.
He's a Flumph professor, not a Flumph inventor, is what I would say. So, Teos, let's talk a little bit about how you play. Right? When you play, typically, what are you doing at the table? And what games besides D&D do you like to play?
Yeah, sure. Well, I have a problem in that I'm an extrovert. I'm opinionated, and if left to my own devices, I can dominate a table. So one of the things I'm often trying to do is play support characters and really forcibly try to help people shine, especially if I'm at a convention or with new players, situations like that. then that's what I tend to do. Come up with a fun quirk and try to make that kind of little bits, bursts of fun from my character so I have my good times, but then let it, go. And I do tend to like the ridiculous.
And
games I play, I like a variety of games. Modern games like Knights Black Agents are a lot of fun. 13th Age. I really love the mechanics of Rob Schwab's Demon Lord. I always love the setting of Shadowrun. Not quite the mechanics, but periodically I get drawn back into that. Legend of the Five Rings, for the way it mixes role-playing and social with combat. I really like that. There's so many good games.
I know at Winter Fantasy this year, you were running Pelgrane Press, Knights Black Agents, and Time Watch. And for people who don't know, Winter Fantasy is typically a very D&D Adventurers League heavy organization, or convention, I should say. You do a ton of D&D. Why did you feel like you wanted to bring the Pelgrane Press stuff to Winter Fantasy and to new players?
So two reasons. One is that I thought, Baldman Games has some space in that convention to bring in some new things. So I thought it would be good for Baldman Games, and I believe in them. They do a great job, so I wanted to do that. And the second was, particularly, I selected Pelgrane to come in because they're just a fantastic company with fantastic games. And I do think it's important for gamers, no matter what your favorite game is, to play other games. You learn so much from seeing how different systems tackle the same situations. A lot of these systems come from a really completely different angle. And when you see that, you get tons of ideas. You play your D&D better. You write your D&D better. So I'm very thankful for all that I have learned from other RPGs. And the more I can give that to others, I'm all for that.
So what do you envision, for your future in the industry of tabletop games? What would you like to be doing, 10 years from now? The same thing? Do you have some sort of goal? What should I be doing with my life, Teos? You tell me your goal and I will follow.
Well, I would love to make RPGs my full-time job. Like many of us that get enough of a taste in it and feel like we maybe can be at all good at it. That would be a dream, but it just doesn't pay enough to support a family. So sometimes my dream is to figure out some way that we could change the hobby so that when you have somebody who you really look up to and they do this hobby full time, that 5 to 10 years from now we're not going to be supporting their GoFundMe to pay for their medical expenses. That would be cool, but I keep thinking through ideas and not knowing how to make that really add up to change the hobby enough. On a personal level, yeah.
Oh no, go ahead.
Okay. I was just going to say, on a personal level, there are lots of projects that I'd love to work on. I would love to work on Dark Sun for 5th edition if it ever comes out. One of my favorite adventure series is Pharaoh and the Desert of Desolation. So if I could ever do something on that, that'd be amazing. Working on Acquisitions Incorporated is a dream. They're super creative, super fun to work with, and make me laugh all the time. So all three of those would be great future projects.
Totally. Those sound awesome, and I think you would be great for them. Your passion for Dark Sun is rivaled only by that of Robert Aducci. I am wondering, you wrote a great blog post on your blog, alphastream.com, about what is an adventure worth. Oh, .org. Sorry, alphastream.org. So what is an adventure worth? Really delved into sort of the financial return versus how much time you put into an adventure. And I would love if you could break that down right now for everybody listening and watching, because I think it's surprising. And it really shows that this is more than just prepping for your game. And a lot of people put hours into that.
Yeah. So, I like to use for my adventure calculations about 40 hours of work. But it's really a lot more than that has gone into a lot of my adventures. So you're familiar, and we didn't talk about, but you've mentioned before, Adamantine Chef, which is on the DMs Guild. And that adventure, I began working on it some 5 years before I published it, originally as a pitch for Dungeon Magazine. Then I worked on it, play tested it, worked on it some more, and I called that 40 hours, but it was, probably twice that, maybe 3 times that. And the amount of money it's made is just really, really very low. And so for all the work that I do, I like to calculate out an hourly wage and see, am I reaching minimum wage? And the answer for anything that isn't Adventurers League is generally no. And that's despite having a fairly decent reputation, a lot of friends that are kind enough to promote my stuff. And so the reality is, for most people publishing on the DMs Guild, it pays very, very, very poorly. Not worth your time in terms of a business. And if you work for a lot of companies, you are very fortunate if you can get 6 cents a word. So it is just such a tough industry. And yet what we often hear from fans is, why does this cost so much?
Yeah, I think that's a really fascinating thing, is that we think about books as costing a certain amount, but typically the number of people who work on a role-playing game product, it's more like a video game than it is like the number of people who work on a novel, right? And so that's a big part of it. And then when you work for a company, you're really fortunate in that they take care of playtesting, editing, layout, that sort of thing. If you're putting out your own stuff on Drive-Thru or DMs Guild self-publishing, you wind up with just so much more time poured into this product, and you're really not getting the same return. It's very, very difficult. So what is kind of something that you compare RPGs to then to get people to sort of invest more in the hobby?
Well, I try to look at, if we're going to say as a fan, hey, D&D is my #1 hobby, this is what I love, then look at what you spend monthly on various forms of entertainment. Because if this is really your favorite, shouldn't it be pretty high? And maybe you shouldn't be so worried about the price of a hardback. On one of my articles of what an adventure is worth, I looked at the price that I'm paying per session for running Tomb of Annihilation. And it just comes down to pennies a session, because you run so many hours of play for that one price you pay. And so I think evaluating how we spend and saying, you know what, I'm willing to support this and pay more. I'm willing to support these people who are writing on the Guild. I'm going to back a Patreon. Any of those activities is really very helpful to the hobby. The other thing is to not put down efforts by companies to make luxury products, right? If it's $100 special edition thing, or it's a t-shirt that costs more than most t-shirts cost, our hobby actually needs that really, really badly. And so support that and stand up for it, because our hobby actually needs to increase its prices.
Do you think that right now the hobby has grown? Like, from my perspective, it definitely seems that way. But I hear some people say, like, D&D always ebbs and flows. And that's my grognard impression. So, but I like, how do you feel? Are you with me, or are you with the grognards? No offense.
I'm always with you, James. No, yeah, I'm totally with you. I mean, the hobby has never felt like this. I have kids that are 12 and 14, and they tell me just how many people in their classes are playing D&D, and there are multiple groups in their classes. That's impressive, right? That is better than what I had when I was their age. So D&D really is in a sweet spot, and I think all RPGs are also in a sweet spot, though they feel it to a lesser extent. This is a good time, and it's a time that we can hopefully capitalize on it and make the hobby better.
Nice. I've got some questions here from the viewers. One is, what is a monster you would like to write into an adventure that you haven't written yet?
Ooh, that's tough. That's tough. Well, there are an endless number of darks and monsters, but I would say that there was a pretty neat monster in 2nd edition. I don't remember if it was called the Thessal Hydra, or if it was just like the Thessal Hydra, but it sort of had this central big maw and then almost like all these bunch of different heads around it. And I think it could also spit out acid and things like that. And some big giant, PC eating creature like that, it's time to put one of those in an adventure.
Have you ever gotten to write the Tarrasque?
No, I haven't. I think my favorite take on it, though I like the Encoded Designs Tarrasque book, is what Sean Merwin did with the Binman Bronze Bottom adventure, Acquisitions and Corporate Adventure, where he had a giant sleeping Tarrasque and you had to pick stuff off of its carapace with a chance of waking it.
That's really awesome. That's really, really cool. You write so many adventures. What do you think makes a good adventure? What is essential for every adventure to have?
So I think that there are probably a couple pieces. One is, I do think it's important to, in your writing, make it awesome and exciting for the DM. Because when your DM is fired up about running it, they'll get excited, right? Like, oh, I want to do this with it. Like when I write convention adventures, sometimes I'll show up like at Gen Con or Origins, and I'll be there in the back when there's the DM meeting. And I love it when a DM comes up and says, I was thinking of doing this with this encounter. Is that cool? And it's like, yes, that's exactly what I want you to do, is get excited about the words on the page and want to run it a certain way, including a way that's not my way. That is the best, right? So if you can energize the GM, you're in a good place. I think for the players, I love giving them choices where they're really not sure what to do. Okay, they're the Yuan-Ti, that's pretty important. And then there's snakes coming out of the walls. And there's also that treasure. How do we go about this? And they're not sitting there solving a tremendous puzzle or, overdoing it. It's really just a couple of seconds. It's really quick. But that engagement like that, I think that's really good for players. It really stimulates them.
And do you think, how, when you're running a published adventure, how by the book do you stick to the adventure?
I can't even run my own adventures right. It's there are a lot of words on the page, and if you just slave yourself to them, you'll probably be disappointed because it's hard to do all that correctly. I was running Cloud Giant's Bargain the other day for my parents, which was really a fun experience. And I realized, oh yeah, I did that wrong. But it doesn't matter, right? To me, when I'm trying to run, I look at what the players are doing and where I should go based on that. What are they liking? What are they reacting to? And I go more in that direction.
Nice. That's awesome. So this is another question from chat, and it comes from the one and only Sly Flourish. Can you talk about whether hazards should scale in adventures or should they be static? Do ropes have levels?
They do when Mike is at my table. Well, so I do think that's an interesting question, right? There's sort of these two ways of looking at RPGs and the difficulty of the RPGs in this setting. So if I'm a level 20 adventurer and I go up to a locked door, is that lock the same DC as it was when I was first level and went up to a locked door? Is it just the world has locked doors and they're always, DC 10 or 15 or whatever you choose, always? Or by virtue of my being a 20th level character, is that a DC 25 to open that lock? And it's a fascinating question. I go towards the DC 25 because to me, a DC 10 lock, DC 15 lock is just not a lock. I don't worry about it. That's not even worth putting in there. So I want a DC 25 lock. I want difficulties that scale with the PCs because to me, that's the engagement of the scene. But I completely understand how people feel otherwise. And I think it's one of the great questions in RPGs.
Do you write that into the story? So does the lock become, obviously sort of the adventures your players go on start to change as they level up sometimes. So it would stand to reason that the locks on Orcus's Tower of Bone are not the same as the locks on the Thieves Guild down the road, right?
Right, right. So it depends kind of what we're working on, but like in the D&D Open or in the Dwarven Forge adventures, they're written for several levels of play. And so what I did was provide scaling by tier. If you're in tier 1, here's the DC. Tier 2, this other DC. Tier 3. So the DM just tells you the DC. As a player, you just hear a DC. You don't know that there were 2 other possibilities, but the game was scaling to you. That makes sense.
Yeah, totally. That does. That makes a lot of sense. It's an interesting question because I do think 5th edition, right, one of their bounded accuracy design goals that I think gets talked about a lot is they didn't want to have as big of a swing there between DCs and that sort of thing. They wanted to see characters get better at picking locks. What is your favorite edition of D&D to design for?
I was really worried when 5th came out that I was good at 4th and I was going to be bad at 5th. But I've been able to find, my happy spot with designing for 5th, and I love how open and creative it can be. It really does let you write a scene the way you want to write it without any mechanic piece intruding on you. But I do still miss writing 4th edition set pieces, movie set type encounters. 4th was just amazing for that. So while I'm perfectly happy in 5th, there are elements of 4th that I do miss.
Nice. Well, I think that's true, and I think you're brave to say it. Not that many people will say that they enjoyed 4th edition because of whatever stigma. But I think 4th was great, and I think the work that you did. Yeah, they're all awesome. They're all really awesome. As long as there's a dragon in a dungeon, I'm playing it. So there's another question from chat. They want to know if you've seen any of Shad Diversity's vids on what weapon would blank monster use. I don't know if you have, but have you? And if not, then answer this question. What weapon would the Tarask use if it had a weapon?
Wow. Okay. I have not seen this, so I'm going to have to do some work after this. What weapon would a Tarask use? I think it would have like a giant catapult on its back, or an enormous spring-loaded hammer. It was something be so massive it could just destroy terrain, squash several PCs at a time. That sounds good to me.
We've talked a lot about adventure design and encounter design tonight, but I'm wondering, what about monster design? That's hand in hand, I think.
Yeah. You hear me okay? I don't know if you hear me or not, but on monster design,
hey, sorry, I dropped. So sorry about that. Teos, we've talked a lot about adventure design and encounter design. I'm wondering, what about monster design? That's part of adventures as well. Are there any monsters you've made that you're particularly proud of?
A number of them that I really enjoy. In 4th edition for Dark Sun, we had some pretty neat things like an antlion, which is a classic adventure that's appeared in AD&D and even in 3rd edition. And it could do things like use its pincers to grab one person and whirl them around the little sand pit cone, hitting everybody else that's there. I did a version of the Bahir that was really quite brutal. That was a lot of fun. For 5th edition, I've been designing more and more monsters of late, and some of them I can't talk about. But with Dwarven Forge, I got to make a lot of monsters there. And if you look at the Dungeon of Doom, you can download the Dungeon of Doom adventure for free on the Dwarven Forge website. And it has the first 6 encounters out now, but the next 6 have some really tenacious boss monsters, including a sort of lava dragon or lava drake, and also Sisul, the goddess who's at the very end of the place. And both of those, I think, have some really great mechanics that should be a lot of fun for DMs and players alike.
Oh, that's awesome. I love that.
I will tell you one of my favorite monsters. My friend Chad Brown designed one in 4th edition where it was a circle of defiled ash around this boss. And what the defiled ash did was give you a death save failure every round you stayed in it.
Wow. That's
Some
crazy.
real pressure.
When you design a monster, what do you do to make it unique? There's only so many mechanics. There's only so many conditions that you can apply. What are you looking for when you set out to make a new monster?
I tried to do 2 things. One's borrowed from 4th edition, the idea of a signature move, right? Like a goblin being shifty. So I try to find something like that, something it maybe does often or does in a prominent enough way that you go, okay, yeah, right. Like the Remorhaz is superheated, you hit it, you take fire damage. That just communicates the essence of the monster really well. And then I want a big hit, something it doesn't have to do very often necessarily, but you're going to really go, okay, that's cool. And if you just have those 2 things in a monster, you're kind of done. And then it's just whether you find anything else for it.
Cool. Yeah, that's, I always try to include some sort of what I call breath weapon, right? Because the dragon breath weapon is like, oh, there's that cool thing, or their frightful presence is a thing that sort of shows up once an encounter, right? But is really cool and is the thing everybody fears about that monster. I love that.
Oh.
So as we're wrapping up here, Teos, what advice do you have for people who want to do what you do?
What I would advise folks to do to end up publishing, one is really work on your writing. You're not going to go far if you don't communicate well in written form. The principles of grammar, understanding how one sentence flows into the other, how a paragraph flows into the other, and so on. Those are critical pieces. There are books on it. There are videos on it. You can go to community colleges and pick up cool courses on it. But you will want that in your repertoire. It's important if you're going to do a lot of that work. The best way, I think, to learn about what to write and how to write it is to participate in organized play. You don't even have to write for it, but if you DM at a convention and you run the same adventure, 4 times over the weekend, 5 times over the weekend for the different tables, you will see what resonates consistently and why. You'll be able to kind of figure that out. Okay, this part of it really worked. This encounter fell flat, and you can sort of dissect that. Read lots of work by others. Be nice to everybody. Help build a good community. People will notice that. They'll react to it. They'll want to work with you. Be real and passionate and honest. Elevate people around you. They'll turn on others. Sometimes you, or just move distant. And thinking about how they have supported me over the years, or how my wife, how my kids have supported me. Being really kind to those people who support your time and your passion is really important.
And finally, we have one more question from chat here, Teos. They want to know what books you suggest for world building that works with sort of most systems. There's somebody who's trying to build a solar system for the Time of War Battletech campaign. It's a Battletech RPG.
So first, I'm glad that the question didn't come from Mike Shea. Second, that's a good question to ask a future guest, because I actually don't do a whole lot of world building. It is not my strong suit. I tend to work with elements that come really around a discrete experience of the adventure, or things that, draping the setting over a monster. So I do like the World Builder's Guidebook, I think it's called. It's like a 2nd edition book it's on my shelf somewhere back there, but that has really amazing information in it. And there are a couple of others that have been recommended me over the years, but that one I know is available on the Guild, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, there's also D&D Jester's Guide to World Building is really great for system neutral, and the Cobalt Guide to World Building is also really great. Yeah, that's a series of essays by game designers that's really, really good.
All of those guides are awesome.
Yeah, there's a bunch. Combat, magic, all kinds of good stuff. Plots and campaigns. Anyway, Teos, we're out of time, but before we go, where can people find you on the internet?
AlphaStream on Twitter. alphastream.org is my blog. Once I finish a secret project I can't talk about, I will be on my blog again, but that is the last thing I'm going to do these days. But I love writing about it and always appreciate people's feedback there. If you want to see me in person, the best way to spend time, as James already knows, is the Winter Fantasy Convention. That's where you get lots of time to hang out with people. It's super fun. Otherwise, I try to make appearances at Origins, and I may go to PAX Unplugged this year.
That's awesome. Well, if you do, let me know. It's my neck of the woods. Teos, thank you for joining me. Thank you to Will and Sydney and Encounter Roleplay for having this stream. It has been an incredible time. And if you want to learn more about me, I'm on Twitter at James Introcaso, and I run a podcast network called Don't Split the Podcast Network. It's at don'tsplitthepodcastnetwork.com, and I give game design advice at worldbuilderblog.com. That is it for this show. We will see you next week when our guest is Rich Lescaflair. It's going to be really exciting, and I will see you all then. Be very, very kind to each other.